Charles Bronson, Britain's most violent prisoner. Born Michael Gordon Peterson on 6 December 1952, Bronson has often been referred to in the press as the most violent prisoner in Britain. The family moved from Luton to Cheshire, and by 13 years old, he was caught stealing and was reprimanded in juvenile court. He then returned to Luton, where he worked in a supermarket and was fired after 2 weeks for attacking his manager. As a boy, he was a lovely lad. He was obviously bright and always good with children. He was gentle and mild-mannered, never a bully. He would defend the weak. Eileen Parry, Bronson's aunt. Early prison life. In 1968, he was sent to Risley Prison on remand for causing criminal damage to nearby cars during an argument with his girlfriend's father. After his trial, he was cautioned and put on probation after paying a fine. During the day, Bronson worked as a removal man, and at night he was an unlicensed fighter, taking part in matches in underground clubs. He would spend many occasions in front of judges throughout the next few years, from petty crime to crashing a stolen lorry. Bronson was handed suspended sentences, fines and probation periods, instead of going to prison. In 1972, he married his pregnant girlfriend, Irene, and 5 months later, Michael Peterson was born. After this, Bronson was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 7 years at Walton Jail, now Him Prison, Liverpool, in Lancashire. He was quickly transferred when he had a disagreement with a guard and destroyed a workshop. These transfers would continue throughout Bronson's years behind bars, due to his violence towards prison guards and fellow inmates. He would see the inside of Armley, Wakefield, Parkhurst, Walton and Yorkshire prisons between 1974 and 1989, but in total, he would serve time in 120 institutions across Britain. In 1976, Bronson tried to poison his cell neighbour at Wandsworth Prison, and so he was moved to Parkhurst Prison briefly, where he became acquainted with the Cray twins. "I used to spar with Reg and he was fast. When he boxed he was body punisher, he hurt you with combinations and rib crushes." He was swiftly returned to Wandsworth after he threatened to kill another prison guard. He began to dig his way out of his prison cell and spent 4 months in isolation after this attempted escape. "I would arrive naked in a body belt and the treatment would kick off from one. These blocks were run by a fist of steel. Always the biggest and ugliest screws in the jail. Not one under 6 feet." Bronson's depiction of Wandsworth Prison. It was realized too late that Bronson would likely need psychiatric help, and in December 1978, he was finally transferred to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital in Berkshire, where Ronnie Cray now lived. Bronson continued on his violent path and was found strangling inmate Gordon Robinson in the lunchroom. Soon after, he began the first of his rooftop protests, where he caused damage to the roof in an attempt to escape. His second protest caused £250,000 worth of damage to the building. That lasted 3 days before he was eventually talked down by his family members. His third protest didn't last long, but he then began an 18-day hunger strike which saw him transferred to Ashworth Hospital in 1984. He quickly returned to his violent behavior, stabbing Mervyn Hawley with a sauce bottle, where he was put in insulation, and several years were added to his sentence after he admitted to causing grievous bodily harm. After much-needed treatment, Bronson began his artistry. He sketched cartoons and wrote poems, earning him awards in prison for his work. In 1986 alone, Bronson was transferred 8 times between various prisons, including a return visit to Wandsworth. Throughout these stretches, he strangled the governor of Wormwood Scrubs, he punched an inmate on his first day back in general prison population at Albany, and he sat another 3-day protest on the roof of Walton, which caused another £100,000 in damages. In 1987, Bronson was released from Gartree Prison and was met by his family, who took him to his parents' home in Wales. Soon after, he returned to London and became a bare-knuckle boxer. He took part in multiple underground fights, including killing a Rottweiler with his bare hands in a £10,000 fight. On the 1st of January 1988, Bronson robbed a jewelry store, keeping one ring for his girlfriend and selling the remainder of his loot. 6 days later he was arrested by police on his early morning run and was charged under his fighting name, Charles Bronson, rather than Michael Peterson. And back to prison. He was sent back to Leicester Prison, where he awaited trial. Meanwhile, he attempted to escape and was transferred to Brixton Prison in London, where he was placed in a high-security unit that housed only 16 prisoners. He pleaded guilty to the armed robbery and was sentenced to 7 years behind bars. During this stretch, he would be transferred between various prisons, including Full Sutton, Wandsworth, Durham, Long Larton and Birmingham. However, when incarcerated at Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight, Bronson was attacked by his fellow inmates, who stabbed him in the back multiple times. He refused to speak about the incident and was released from prison in November 1992. 53 days out of jail. Bronson was free for 53 days before he was once again incarcerated for attempted robbery, despite his insistence that his girlfriend and her new lover were trying to get him put back inside. The charges were soon dropped, although he was made to pay a fine of £600 for breaking his girlfriend's new boyfriend's nose. Just 16 days later, Bronson was arrested again for ownership of sawn-off shotgun and conspiracy to commit robbery once more. Whilst incarcerated at Woodhill Prison, he captured a librarian and made his demands to the governor: a helicopter, a cup of tea and an inflatable sex doll. The librarian was released when he broke wind in front of a repulsed Bronson. He pleaded guilty to the possession of the shotgun but claimed he was going to kill himself with it. He denied the intended robbery but was still given an 8-year sentence and transferred to Wakefield Prison, where he spent his first 40 days in isolation, naked. He was later taken to Hull Prison, where he took the deputy governor hostage. In September 1994, Bronson's father died, and the news was not taken well. He took 2 inmates, who were in prison for hijacking, and another inmate whose crimes are unknown, hostage in his cell. He then forced them to call him General and to tickle his feet. After demanding 2 submachine guns, ice cream, a plane to fly him to Libya, and then slashing himself with a safety razor, he let the captives go. Another 5 years were added to his sentence. Throughout this stretch in prison, Bronson also took his doctor and an education worker hostage. The latter episode included a sit-in that lasted almost 2 days. Because of these 2 incidents and the many that came before, a special unit was built at Woodhill Prison for Bronson, Robert Maudsley and Reginald Wilson, a murderer, due to constant threats to staff and other inmates. Marriage. In 2001 and now incarcerated at Milton Keynes Prison, Bronson married 31-year-old Syra Raymond, with her 10-year-old daughter acting as bridesmaid. A longtime pen pal of Bronson, Syra claimed it was love at first sight. "When I first saw his picture I just couldn't get him out of my mind. It's just one of those things you really can't explain in words. I just can't put my finger on it. My feelings for him were very strong and I had to pursue them and see where it went." The pair were married for 4 years, with Bronson taking on his wife's Islamic faith and changing his name to Charles Ali Ahmed, but quickly reverted when they divorced. Bronson would later marry actress Paula Williamson, after 5 months of visitations. The couple married on the 14th of November 2017, but by the next summer, Bronson had asked for a divorce. A photo of Williamson was leaked to the newspapers, of her on holiday with a man's face between her breasts. Williamson was found dead at her home in July 2019, but the police found no suspicion surrounding her death. Since the late 90s, Bronson has had 11 books published and has won 11 Koestler Trust Awards for his efforts. In 2002, Bronson published Solitary Fitness, a book about workout regimes in a limited space, with no access to equipment. The movie Bronson was released in 2009 and made over $2 million worldwide. Fronted by Tom Hardy, the film showcased Bronson's inner monologue and his time in incarceration up to that point. Bronson praised Hardy's efforts and as a gift, he cut off his mustache and mailed it to him. In August 2013, a petition was sent to the Prime Minister, David Cameron's Downing Street home. The appeal, which included 10,000 signatures, requested that Charles Bronson be released from prison. The petition aimed to raise awareness of Bronson and the long hours he spends in solitary confinement. Lorraine Etherington, from the Charlie Bronson Appeal Fund stated, "He is not a danger to the public. I would argue that he never has been. Out of pure frustration he has tried to get attention by taking hostages and causing trouble, but he knows today that is not the way forward." However, no intervention came from the Prime Minister's office and the petition went unresolved. Less than a year later, Bronson viciously attacked the Woodhill governor, consequently giving him an additional 2 years on his sentence. Bronson changed his name to Charles Salvador in 2014, in homage to Salvador Dali. He began to create his infamous art pieces, which he described as fantasy reality, and a number of the pieces were auctioned off later that year. Several of the canvases raised thousands of pounds, which was given to Bronson's mother, for a holiday. This act came from her upset of Bronson attacking 12 guards in Woodhill Prison. 2 years later, he auctioned off another of his paintings to raise money for a child with cerebral palsy. Where is he now? In August last year, Stephen Gillen, a convicted armed robber, sold his story to The Sun. He was Charles Bronson's cellmate for 3 years and told of his experience being locked in a cage with Britain's most violent prisoner. At 67 years old, Charles Bronson, now Charles Salvador, remains in prison at Woodhill but continues his fight for freedom. Whilst that long battle rumbles on in the background, he campaigns for smaller issues in prison, like getting fish and chips put back on the dinner menu at Woodhill. Should we free Charles Bronson? Let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to like and share.